Hey everybody, this is Coach Sean here with Glory Days Athletics, and today I'm going to be talking to you about what our process is here and how we are going to walk athletes through our program when we're going to be developing them as it relates to strength. So some of the things we're going to be getting into, how we change the program based on age and maturity level. What position are they training for, or what sport do they play, for example, and where does an athlete need to improve? Are they a strong and slow athlete, such as an offensive lineman or something like that, or are they a very fast but not as strong athlete, such as a sprinter, for example? So we're also going to review some of the tools that we use to help shape some of these programs, like the force velocity curve, for example, or the concept of rate of force development. And then we're also going to be getting into the different strength programs that we utilize as tools to help shape these programs as well, whether it's Cal Dietz triphasic training or something super simple like Jim Wendler's 5-3-1, or the German volume training method, or something we'll be reviewing it as well, like the French contrast training method as well. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and let's get into it. So let's first start by talking about, how we need to adjust the program based on the age and the maturity level of the athlete. Obviously I need to take into consideration, and we take into consideration here, is this athlete going to be prepubescent, or are they a teenager that's well into puberty that could be trained differently and also experience different adaptations? So I made a video about this earlier that explained, the adaptations that you will see in an athlete that is younger, that is prepubescent, would be much different because they're only going to see neuromuscular adaptations such as improvement in motor patterns, for example, or improvement in bone mineral density. Where if I have somebody who's older, who is well into the stages of puberty, or if they're into adulthood, if they're a college athlete or a professional athlete, we're going to be able to develop those people a lot differently, training for maximum strength, for example, or hypertrophy. So it's two different approaches depending on where the actual athlete is at, and how we have to shape our program from there. So and the thing is, and even if you wanted to develop specific traits in a younger athlete, like for example, their speed, or even their agility, a lot of the times they are not strong enough to display something like proper running mechanics. So doing something like training them with body weight exercises is able to improve their motor patterns and learn some of these different things so that they have the strength capability to run properly. And a lot of the times, even with something like agility training, they have underdeveloped motor skills and coordination. So for example, I remember the first time that I saw my son. He's an 11-year-old football athlete. The first time that I saw him run through an agility ladder, it was an absolute nightmare. It's very normal for kids to look awkward or have a hard time with learning these movements, and it's very simple. It's because they're at the age where they're learning specific motor patterns, and their nervous system is teaching their body how to do these different movements. So it's actually 100% and totally normal for somebody to experience something like that. And then we have, maybe somebody who's older, for example, maybe they're an 8th grader or even a freshman in high school, and they've never trained with resistance before. So we still need to take a different approach to how we treat that athlete, because yes, we can treat them and train them to do something like muscle growth or hypertrophy, for example. But that being said, they're inexperienced when it comes to lifting. So if I was going to take somebody through, I'll walk you through a quick progression here. If I was going to be training an athlete with the ultimate goal of wanting them to be able to clean and jerk, for example, I would usually start them with a very simple lift like a deadlift, and then from there we can progress that into a deadlift and shrug, and then we could progress that into a clean, and then into a power clean, and then into a clean and jerk. And then they're in the position and their body is strong enough where they have a certain foundation of strength where they can also do other Olympic lifts like snatches, for example. So these are all things that we have to consider when we're working with different athletes of different ages, different maturity levels, different biological development, and obviously different levels of experience. So now that we know the age range and the maturity level of the athlete that we're working with, now we need to take into consideration some of these other things to help mold and shape the program based on who we're working with. So for example, what sport are we training this athlete for? What is their position? What type of adaptations are we looking for? And how much time do we have to work with this athlete to get the best results out of those adaptations? All of those things have to be considered, and after we take somebody through our evaluation process, it gives us an opportunity of where the low-hanging fruit will be, and then also what we can do to get the most results during the time that we have with that athlete. So what type of athlete are we dealing with? Are we dealing with an athlete that, generally speaking, when I'm working with athletes, we're going to be dealing with two guys at the end of the day. We're going to be dealing with somebody who's either very strong and is not as fast, or we're going to be dealing with somebody who's very fast and is not as strong. So those are two extreme examples here, but this is where we implement the tool like the force velocity curve example into our training, where depending on where the athlete is at, we can kind of mold and shape the program based on the actual adaptation that we're looking for. So I'm going to make an entire separate video explaining the force velocity curve, but you can see here at the top of the curve we have maximal strength, which would be somebody who's very good at producing a lot of force. So for example, someone like a power lifter. At the bottom of the force velocity curve we have speed, or someone who's very fast, maybe like a 100-meter sprinter, for example. So sticking with an example of working with a 100-meter sprinter, at the end of the day, when you are looking to drop your time, I think that would be the goal of any 100-meter sprinter, is to always be improving their time. You could only produce the amount of force based off of how strong you are, because when you are a 100-meter sprinter, you have to be able to produce a lot of force quickly. And this is where not only the force velocity curve comes into play, but where we start to look at things like rate of force development, for example. So if I was working with a 100-meter sprinter and we had some time in their off season, maybe we would initially start their program with a higher emphasis on strength and hypertrophy work, with less focus on their actual sprinting, but just enough to stay sharp, maybe once or twice a week, for example. And then as we get closer to competition, we would taper back the strength stuff and put a higher emphasis on the volume of doing the sprint work. So for a lot of people, they think, well, why would you train somebody who's already fast and put muscle on them? Isn't that going to make them slower? Not necessarily, no. If it's done correctly and you make that athlete stronger, they are able to produce more force, and you're basically, as you increase their strength, you're raising their ceiling for the amount of force that they can produce, and the more force that they can produce, the faster that their time should be, and they should be able to run faster now that you've raised their ceiling of strength. So this is one example of how we would take a specific athlete and put them through the program, and how we would transition that athlete from starting at one point and then ending at another, based on an adaptation that we're looking to train. But this is the type of, conceptually the type of approach that we take with any athlete. If I'm working with a linebacker or a cornerback, or if I'm working with a basketball guard, or if I'm working with a first baseman, for example, or whoever it may be, we're able to understand what the athlete needs, and we're able to put together a program that gets those adaptations and gets them prepared in time when it's time to compete, it's time to play. So now that we understand the age range and the maturity level of our athlete, we understand their biological development, we understand their experience level, we understand their strengths and weaknesses, and we understand what their goals are and what they're looking to achieve, now we have to try to piece all of this together into a program that's going to make sense. So at the end of the day, when we're developing an athlete from a strength perspective, we're going to be developing one of two things. We're either going to be developing type 1 muscle fibers, or type 2, or what's often referred to as fast twitch muscle. So Type 1, and I'm not going to get into a whole muscle physiology conversation right now, but type 1 muscle fibers are used in somebody who's more like an endurance athlete, for example. So, you know, someone like a cyclist or a cross-country runner, for example, where, you know, type 2 muscle fibers or fast twitch, which is very fast, explosive muscle, is what's going to be recruited and utilized in most field sports and most athletes' sports that we work with, unless, of course, you're training for, you know, an event or something like that, or if you're a distance runner for track, we might, you know, adjust the program slightly to develop more of these type 1 fibers. So now we do have a few different strength programs that, you know, we use as a resource where we can adjust the programs based on what the athlete actually needs. So to give you an example of a few of those, we have something like Cal Dietz triphasic training, for example, where there's a focus on either developing the eccentric, isometric, or concentric portion of when a muscle lengthens, shortens, or is in a static position. You know, and then we can do something like the German volume training method, which is a program that focuses specifically on strength and muscle mass. Or we could even take concepts from something as simple as Jim Wendler's 5-3-1, for example, which basically is a very simple method, but you know, can be effective with progressive overload for an athlete. Or you know, when we get closer to competition, you know, we might implement something that is similar, not exactly like French contrast training, which basically is a program that focuses on post-activation potentiation. So I can have a whole video that I explain on all of these different training programs, but for something like French contrast training, for example, it's basically a heavy compound lift followed by a plyometric exercise, followed by a weighted plyometric exercise, followed by an assisted plyometric exercise. So that is something that people would normally do closer to competition when they're looking to focus more on speed and power, for example, after they've already been through you know, maybe their strength and hypertrophy piece of the training. So, and obviously from this video, you can tell that depending on the athlete and the circumstances, all of those things would be adjusted and changed based on the actual needs of the athlete. So hopefully you realize by now that depending on, you know, where you are at, it really does not matter where you are at with your development, whether you are a young athlete that's never trained before, or if you are an experienced athlete that is looking to sharpen your tools. You know, we have a program that is going to make sense for you. We can help you, okay? So if you found this video helpful, if you have any questions, please let us know. If this is something you want to learn more about, please feel free to go to glorydaysathletes.com, fill out an athlete intake form, and we'll reach out and go over any questions that you have. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment. If you are watching this video on TikTok or Instagram, feel free to DM us if you have a question, and follow us for more if you want to get more training tips or advice. So just remember, here at Glory Days Athletics, we want you to train with purpose and perform with pride. Thank you.